I'd like to say special thanks to all of the members of the Nader family that are here, and a particular thank you this morning to Adnan, who is playing his violin for us. I also would like to thank for their presence the honored guests from our symposium this week, particularly Dr. Ghani. And to get started, also a few more thank yous. Thank you to Anthropology department staff, particularly Carolyn Fraser and Kathleen Van Sickle, and really for all the department staff that have heroically carried on through the budget cuts. Francesca Latanzani in the Dean's office. Also, we'd like to thank Suzanne Calpestri, irreplaceable. Terrence Deacon, our department chair. And Hoda Banda Amadi for her organizational work. So thanks to everyone. And as we said before we took our food detour, this morning is really thinking about pedagogy and civic life and how we care for ourselves and our collective selves, and how some of the ideas or the approaches or the methods or the relationships that we were introduced to here at Berkeley have carried on with us and inflect our diagnosis of the present and the predicaments that we find ourselves in and our plans for action for the future. So with that, I would like to open up the floor, and I'm assuming, given the person that we all studied with, that we are not shy wallflowers, and that we all have thought a lot and are working a lot on these issues. And there are many of us here, which means that we're going to try to ask people to practice what Gillian Tett called on us yesterday to do, which is cultivate the ability to speak in bullets. And that is not something that anthropologists like to do. We consider it a compromise. It's uncomfortable. We're going to ask you to practice that this morning by trying to keep your comments to within 2 to 3 minutes. If you can tell what I meant by the food break, we're assuming that sometimes that'll be 3 or 4, but that's what we're going to ask. So with that, I open it up for whoever would like next. And I will be keeping a queue if someone is, so instead of having a stationary mic and having a line, because I think we would all just be standing in line for the entire time, Hoda is going to be going around with a microphone.
And I'll have a microphone.
And Chris has a microphone. And what that means is if you would like to speak next, I'm just going to stand over by the corner. Please signal to me, and then I'll just be keeping a list in order of people who have signaled, and they'll take the microphone to you next, right? But anyone who wants to start first, please just stand up.
Thank you. Controlling processes.
Can you say your name?
Yes, my name is Alberto Sanchez, and I'm a former student of Laura Nader's. Controlling processes. It's a course that bringing in many of us here today. Laura Nader once described it as a critical thinking course, a course in critical thinking. And I think it's about, the way that I understand it is about skills. It's about skills to be able to analyze the world, the contemporary world, in a particular way. The way that Laura Nader describes it, or at least she described it to me, is it's about getting it. And this usually happens sometimes during the period of the semester. Sometimes it happens after the semester is done, but students get it. What do they get? Well, they get a particular way of analyzing and being critical about the world. A couple of weeks ago, a colleague of mine works on an advisory board that works with the intelligence agency in Canada on terrorism. And she was doing a presentation, and basically she was wanting to apply political health paradigm to terrorism. So if terrorists today are thought of in political ways, she wanted terrorists to be seen as something of mental health issue. Yeah, I hear somebody laughing. Part of the skills that we have is that we can be able to analyze and look at that world. So in controlling processes, the way the things that I learned is that you don't take a first kind of take of terrorism as a problem that needs to be solved. The problem with this presentation was that this person was actually wanting to solve terrorism instead of seeing terrorism as a controlling process. There's an old parable that says that, that happy is the person who has many children and grandchildren. And the way that I see it is happy is Laura Nader, because in terms of critical thinking, she has many children and grandchildren, which is all of us. Thank you very much.
I'm Irving Zaretsky, and I thought maybe I should start because I came here to Berkeley in 1959, and when Laura first arrived, we met, so I guess I'm her oldest and longest student in this room. And I was in her first class as an undergraduate. And I would like to address the issue of pedagogy and anthropology primarily via the persona of Laura. Because when I arrived here, she came in from the East Coast in her peck and peck clothing. And she was a breath of fresh air. And she would walk in with that open purse and those high-heeled shoes on those fabulous legs. And the undergraduate said, "Have you gone to Laura Nader's class?" And my roommate, Jim Eldon, brought me there. And we both went in, and we took her first course, and I've been her student ever since. In fact, she brought me into anthropology. I was in the American Studies program here at Berkeley, and she brought me to anthropology graduate school. I suppose in all the years, now we're about 52 years, my approach to life and to education was very much shaped by Laura in terms of learning to ask the right question. Pedagogy in anthropology is not about the world, it's about teaching. How do you teach? How do you pass information from one generation to the next? And how do you get people to open their minds to see the reality that is around them? In my particular case, what interested me in her approach was looking at the world and basically asking what exists. And I soon got the description of being a vacuum cleaner. Well, in those days, to be an anthropologist and to do ethnography and to collect data and to say the more complete your data is, the more knowledge you have of the situation, and you do not need deductive theories, you can build it inductively, was not well regarded. And in fact, your skills as a field worker were terrific, but if you could not come out at the end with some theoretical approach to your problem, you were sort of considered an anthropologist monkey, but that never bothered me. So I proceeded to go in that direction, and I found that in teaching, my biggest help in that approach was to deal with students who came to me from parochial schools. And I found in my early days that teaching students who came from a grammar school, high school, and into college from parochial schools, it was very hard to get them to do field work, even of the most basic sort that you did for a term paper. And it was very hard to have them challenge the textbooks and the information that they were receiving about the very area that they were working if the two differed. And one of the pedagogical tools that you need to have in anthropology today is how to begin to introduce students to think inductively, to work from the data to the theory, and not to be afraid if your conclusion differs from your textbook, to disagree and to know why. And I felt the entire forum of this weekend in talking about building from the ground up. It's not really building from the ground up in terms of looking at the world. It's building from the ground up in terms of your mind. how do you look at what you see and how do you collect the pieces of information and put them together and paint an accurate picture? And how do you get people to be comfortable in trusting themselves? How do you have the faith in yourself to know that what you collected and what you have done to the best of your ability in the most honest way, that it is correct? And if somebody else tells you, but it doesn't agree with Weber, or it doesn't agree with some other, theorist, then you're wrong. And say, well, maybe they looked at different things in different ways, but that's how I see it, and to be able to defend it. That's pedagogy in education. It is to create a healthy view that collects data and can defend it with certainty, because that is what you know and what you saw. And don't let other people tell you that an ideology or a theology or a belief system forces you to readjust your data and your conclusions and your views to that particular ideology. So that's what Laura gave me, and it was the tool of a lifetime. In everything that I do today, and I fought some battles with bureaucracies in business, Laura and then Ralph. I cannot tell you, Ralph, how many times I've used your approach and how financially rewarding it is. So what you have to say is not just simply very wise and analytically important, but it's casual. So, Laura, it's been 52 years, and I look forward to until we're both 120. And we'll walk together and talk to each other and continue on the same road. And pedagogy is about teaching. And Laura, you are a great scholar, a wonderful friend, but nothing comes close to being such a good teacher.
The next person is behind Coda, the woman in the red sweater.
Thank you. Hard to follow that. My name is Jamie Rowan, and I first heard about Dr. Nader when I was 18 years old at a small liberal arts college on the East Coast, frustrated with how narrow I felt like people were in terms of their focus. It was all about working hard and not looking at the bigger picture. And my twin sister was here at Berkeley. She said, Jamie, Laura Nader teaches at Berkeley. And I said, I'm transferring. And the next year I came to Berkeley and took her course, and Anthropology of Law. And the next semester took her course, Controlling Processes, and sat in the front row with my twin sister who audited it. She was a pre-med and couldn't fit that in. And we just sat in this front of this audience looking up at this woman and literally felt our heads expanding. Continued studying with her, asked her to advise me on my thesis. She came to my graduation party, and my father met her. And this was a moment I was very concerned about, because my father has very independent ways of thinking. And I thought, she's going to decide that I must be nuts. And she came up to me after and was not at all unimpressed with him. And it made me think about one of the moments in which I realized that I wanted to study with this woman for my life. Was sitting in her graduate class, she started to kind of push us and say things that just seemed a little bit out there, a little too out there, in fact, that I didn't think she could really believe. And I raised my hand and I said, I think you're wrong. And she said, good! And it was this wonderful moment of, this is a teacher. This is someone who wants me to learn to think for myself. And when I decided to go to graduate school, I said I'm tempted to do anthropology. She said, no, go to the law school. Go to a place where people think differently. You are an anthropologist. And I thought, what does that mean? And it's a way of thinking, I realized, a way of stepping back and figuring out what's going on and staying critical. And in May, I graduate. Laura Nader's on she's on my committee for my PhD, 12 years later. And when I think about just the intellectual trajectory and the whole reason to go about studying, I think about Laura Nader and how she's given this sense of self. It's exactly what you said. It's this sense of, while the world around us is confusing and seems to be falling apart in ways that don't make sense. We have an ability to know who we are, to be able to point out and say to someone, you're wrong, and know that that's really what we should be doing. And that our critical minds, the way in which she's taught us to think, are going to carry us through. And that's about all we can get in this world, and hopefully what we can give back. Thank you, Laura.
Quick announcement for anyone who's standing outside or at the edges in the best tradition of the Gifford room. I invite you to come sit on the floor if you'd rather. And just so you know, we did accept more RSVPs than we had seats, just because we didn't want to limit things because of space. But please feel free to come in and sit in the middle if you'd like. Next, oh, and there are 2 seats up here in the front row for anyone who would like not to sit on the floor but would like to sit. Next, Liza.
My name is Liza Grandia. I was a PhD in 2006. And I have to confess that I never meant to be a professor. In fact, I concertedly meant not to be a professor. But there was, for me, I think a really transformational moment was getting to TA for controlling processes, and it was rereading 1984 more than anything else. At a particular moment in time in the mid-2000s, that I realized the great power of pedagogy for civic action, and that it was an important contribution I could make. I've been teaching in an international development and social change program at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. And by and large, we teach about them. We teach about sort of development disasters. But it's been a delight to teach controlling processes to show what a disaster corporate capitalism has been at home in the heart of empire. And in those years that I've taught controlling processes, this is my 5th time, I think the sort of 3, they hear a lot of stories about Laura Nader, and the 3 that I think stick most with the students that I get from their comments and from emails afterwards is the first very provocative question. What's the difference, what's the opposite of being employed? You all should know this. Self-employed. And so for my students who sort of think that they have to work for AID or for the World Bank, we talk a lot about both the the power of frugality, living beneath one's means as a form of freedom, and of fundraising and learning how to pursue their vision and moving from a model of charity to justice. The second thing that the story they often love to hear, the quote is, "Never be in awe of anything, except perhaps nature." And I would say, I think also perhaps, except for Laura Nader. I told we had the delight of having her visit us at Clark University, and the students, I'm afraid, were in awe of Laura Nader. And the third thing that they remember, and I think apologies to Nadia, but it's such a wonderful story for students and also in my own life now as a mother. I believe Nadia came home from school one day and said, they're calling me an oddball. And Laura Nader said, "You are an oddball. I'm an oddball, your father's an oddball, your uncle's an oddball, the whole family is an oddball." And that, more than anything, I get that from dozens of students on their evaluations, that they've learned to be oddballs and the power of being eclectic. I think what I learned as a graduate student, and for what I'm immensely grateful, is that you taught me to lose my isms. Feminism, conservationism, Marxism. Why wait for the revolution when there are a multitude of alternatives in the here and now? So some students, after taking controlling processes, are prepared to pursue a political project, and that's wonderful, and I love working with them and thinking through those ideas. And others simply begin to appreciate that the personal is political and decide to have a dinner party once a week to talk about ideas or to turn off their Facebook page. And that is the first step in our very complicated, distracted world in connecting personal freedoms with civic freedoms. So thank you very much.
This gentleman in the second row with the blue sweater and the glasses towards me.
Hi, good morning. My name is Mike Alvarado. I'd like to frame my brief comments with two maxims. Person who owns the question owns the answer. And strategy is mostly about deciding what not to do. And, you know, I stand here, the stranger in your midst. Not only am I not an anthropologist, but I was excused from anthropology school. And probably to the better, because, and it's really what I would offer as your legacy, which is not having known you, taken your classes, or personally experienced anything that you taught. You know, the fact that the strangers amongst you is probably very important. And I'd offer as a second aspect of your legacy, which is, I extend an invitation. And here's the invitation. How is it in this time when we have so much difficulty and strife and challenge in dealing with each other? How is it that the anthropologists are not inhabiting these other spaces and leading us with their questions and bringing that dialogue and elevating our perspective to consider the whole? Because in the end, the legacy that we leave as a society has to be informed by this perspective. And I say that with all due humility, not being part of the society that you all inhabit. But I see that as the essential quality. So even though in the letter which says, thank you, you do not no longer need to be part of our society, I still took all that was valuable and can appreciate it. And I again extend very clearly, here's your legacy. Build in society the greater understanding of what we can achieve. Build it today. Don't wait, solve not small problems, solve the big ones, at least work on them, and get out there. It's the least you can do for us. Thank you.
This is the woman with the flowers.
Hello, I'm Allison Dundee Drenthelm, and I'm from the Political Science Department at USC. And I'm here because Professor Laura Nader is a very dear friend of my family's, my father, my mother, and me. And when I was about 11, I think, I had a chance to do research in her office about 40 years ago. And it was for a study for the Carnegie Council on Children. And I have my notes here. The notepad proved the story is true, and went through hundreds of letters written to her brother, complaint letters to see how children were involved. And so I learned at an early age that research is important, that research can influence the world, that children can do things. You don't have to wait till you're a grown-up to make a difference. And so that was a thrilling experience and really influenced me for the rest of my life. I went on to be influenced by her research on cross-cultural justice, to take a global view of law and society. And not very many people have mentioned her tremendous influence in the field of law and society. She's probably the leading scholar in the world in this discipline and received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Law and Society Association. And so in all of my research, I've been very much influenced by her. I remember in college writing a paper for Professor Ronald Dworkin's class on his rights thesis from a cross-cultural perspective. And the TA didn't like it very much because he was not familiar with anthropology of law, but I drew heavily on her scholarship in writing what I thought was a good paper. I was pleased to have a chance to be at conferences with her and see how she would pose questions to people at Willamette Law School, where there was a scholar from India who said some outrageously ethnocentric remarks, and nobody in the audience would say anything except Professor Nader, who posed some questions and made clear what the fallacies were in his statements. And I've seen her speak in Brussels and in Halle, and she's just the most amazing scholar I've ever had the privilege of working with. When I became active in my department and sometimes felt it difficult to criticize colleagues she would say to me, what's the matter with you? What's happened to you? Why don't you speak out on these things? And I learned from her that it's important to use your voice and speak out about things, even when you're pressured not to say things because it will affect your promotions and so forth. And she's been a role model for me and for many other people that it is possible for women to have a career and a family. And she married a physicist. I made sure to marry a physicist too. And I think from the entire Nader family, we've learned the importance of using our knowledge to help other people and to work for the greater good, that even if we have the luxury of being in a university, that we should try to be involved in civic engagement. And so in my teaching, I do try to have the students do original research, to take a global perspective, and to think about ways to make the world a better place. So, like everyone here, I'm very grateful to Professor Nader and have the greatest admiration, and I can't thank you enough for all you've done for all of us.
Next is the gentleman in the black t-shirt next to Jay.
Hi, my name is Jeff Higley. I was a 2009 graduate of this university and had the honor of studying with Dr. Nader in 2007. I'm humbled by the people that are here in this room to honor someone we love. When I attended your class, Dr. Nader, in 2007, it was towards the end of the Bush administration's devastation of our country. And I came here with great alarm and upset. In your class of almost 300 people, you continually encouraged people to speak up, and to even challenge you. And I, being at UC Berkeley, expected that, but was surprised to discover how quiet and compliant students were. Unlike this graduate student over here, most students were concerned about what it took to get an A. I came here today not only to honor you and to be in this august company, but interested in the theme, pedagogy in the civic life. Here in the academy, we speak about Goethe and Fowler and Foucault, but much to the chagrin of all my friends, when I graduated, they didn't want to hear about that. They weren't beginning to have any foundation to understand what that was about. So I found that I had to translate or find some way to take what I learned from you in a way that I could operationalize and use in a way to help my fellow citizens learn how to push back against these controlling processes. Even in this small company today, we're blessed by not only academic leaders, but civic leaders. President aspirants in Ashraf Ghani in Afghanistan, Governor Jerry Brown, Ralph Nader, public citizen exemplar. And my question that I have for this assembly is, we can't have another era like we had with George W. Bush. Yet, there seems to be such a close contest between where this country is going to go. And I'm concerned about helping our fellow citizens become more critical, more aware of the controlling processes that we've spoken about. And I'm just wondering if during the course of today, some of the leaders who actually have asked themselves these questions, how to speak out and inspire our citizens to be more engaged or more aware or more forceful, if they could speak out about how they've discovered or encountered that question, how do I speak effectively? How do I engage in pedagogy for the civic world, that our fellow citizens can be awakened, can be enlightened, can be what we hope America will be in our world. Thank you.
I'll make another invitation for anybody who's standing that would like to sit down. There are a few empty seats, or you can feel free to sit in the middle, long honored tradition here at Berkeley. And maybe Professor Nader or any of our other invited guests would like to respond at this point, or shall we keep taking more comments? More comments? Okay. Next, I think, was Jay, unless you were...
My name is J.O. It's been almost 20 years since I first came to Berkeley, and I just want to tell you one story. I came out of an engineering school. I studied science technology studies and environmental science. And I remember writing Professor Nader, I came to visit in the spring before I started, a letter stating that I would be working at an NGO without even thinking before coming here. And I remember she wrote me back, which was surprising. She wrote me a letter back, handwritten, as many of you might expect, and which for me was a big surprise, stating that it's a good idea to work at NGO before starting academia. It's a good break to be away from it, and I was encouraged. And some 20 years later, for the last 10 years, I've been working out of Seoul, working for environmental research organization and environmental foundation, and as well as being involved with think tanks in South Korea. My research was on multinational corporations, and I just wanted to bring up, in terms of what we're supposed to, I mean, the topic of this get-together today, Pedagogy and Civic Life. On that note, there's some of us who are doing work on multinational corporations, specifically, as Professor Nader tended, the problem of knowledge, how knowledge is used, how the public views, quote-unquote, big science, and how to advocate for better science policy, technology policy. Of course, Korea is one place where that is at the forefront of mainstream debate. The use of technology and the significance of technocrats and think tanks and so on. So we want to start by organizing at least a panel at the AAA. So I hope I'll be around. So if you come up to me, myself or Roberto Gonzalez, who I think is here over there. So we'd like to organize it. So hopefully getting people involved on this topic writ large. Thank you. And thank you for listening.
Next is the woman in the front row with, yes, sorry, here, there you go.
Hi, my name is Paula Cruz Takash, and I was a Nader student in 1981. Controlling processes. But I'm based at UCLA. I run a research center called the North American Integration and Development Center. We work on immigration, on using new technologies to bank the unbanked, those kinds of issues, and both internationally and also domestically here in the United States. I took your course, and it was stimulating in all the ways it's been spoken about, but it was really your article about studying up that I had read just before I got here that I embraced. And actually operationalized, if you would. Thank you. What I ended up doing, following that directive of studying up, is I decided for the PhD work to study the very wealthy who do control all kinds of processes and the political power as well, and therefore the lives of most people. And so I moved to the city of Watsonville after going down to be a good anthropologist in Mexico, living with Mazatecos and all the rest of that. But I decided to then move into Watsonville and to go and live with the richest of the rich, the most powerful, in order to position myself there to be able to be part of activities that had been organized by the Latinos and also the progressives of every racial category, to be able to unseat the entrenched white city council. And we were able to accomplish that working with MALDEF. My research, again, studying up, was used by MALDEF in their court cases. And we did win at the at-large court level, at the appellate court level. And that case was able to affect 9 states that the appellate court has jurisdiction over, and was able to allow us to get our first Chicana in Los Angeles as well, not just in the agricultural community of Watsonville. But it's those kinds of things, I think, that, when we're talking about care of civic self, for me, this is why I came to anthropology and why I came to do a PhD. I come from a violent place. I know the needs that we have and the kind of work that can be done with an anthropological perspective, I think needs to be taken out of the universities more than it has been. Besides having the work, my thesis has not been published yet, but it has been used widely by lawyers in these kinds of cases, by journalists, etc., by everyday folks organizing in communities around these kinds of issues, voting rights, etc. But I also have been doing interviews about what does a people-centered government looks like? What does a people-centered budget look like? We have Governor Brown here. And I know the city managers that I have interviewed, they have said, we've never been asked the question that way. And I think it's the way that the question should be asked. Since that time, I taught at UC San Diego. Teaching is rewarding. It is a political work as well. It can be. But I also found that the academy, both in my experience here at UC Berkeley, also at UC San Diego, is not supportive as an institution of those of us who do work, political work outside of the university. I embrace and support the political work that my colleagues do on the university. It is necessary, it is important that we have people pushing ahead everything in the universities. And they are rewarded in the academic institution for that kind of work, and they should be. But those of us who also do work outside of the university, policy work, are not rewarded in the same ways. That's okay too, because there's many ways to be effective. Our research center has done some of the major work on immigration. Our DREAM Act paper has been used by Congress, both the House and the Senate, and has been cited widely. The work on the economic impacts of immigration, deportation, different scenarios, has been used widely by all kinds of folks, even people mobilized in the communities. And we also have been working on, again, thinking about who controls the processes, okay? Looking at the banks, okay? Looking at the banks, who controls our lives? And then, therefore, going outside of the university, creating a corporation to be able to very concretely deal with these issues about banking, and banking the unbanked, the poor, the underbanked. And so we are working internationally using cell phone technology, internet platforms, to create financial services, to be able to provide those kinds of services for the poor, indigenous, working in Oaxaca, working here in the city of Oakland. The city of Oakland, we won the bid this last year to be able to create the first city ID debit card, prepaid debit card, which is being touted as the first in the country, and that is with a specific purpose of banking the unbanked. And here we're not just talking about undocumented people, we're talking about African Americans, poor white folk, across the board again. So again, I would say that in terms of controlling processes, these are the kinds of arenas that we were talking about yesterday that your brother, Ralph, has attacked and addressed through his whole life, that Dr. Nader has taught about and has pushed us out to take a look at the insurance companies and everything else. But I think that many of us, the academy can get very comfortable if you're not also doing the political work of pushing the academy, okay? But I think that more of us need to be taking what we know and these perspectives into all these different realms. I am also the president of the Human Relations Commission in the city of Los Angeles, and it is an opportunity to be able to take exactly what we learn and be able to use that information working with various groups and various income groups in any given city that you might be living in.
Thank you very much.
With that,
Next goes to the gentleman here with the gray sweater. And just a quick reminder that, thank you for those powerful words. If you are working on a set of action items that you think would be helpful to share with others, or that we could take some ideas from and borrow in different arenas, then please identify maybe the domain instead of the list, and then identify yourself so that we can get together after the forum. Because people are working on so many interesting things that we want to be able to make connections. So with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Casper. It's been intimidating. It's first of all really amazing to be here and to hear everybody share. I had the privilege of having Dr. Nader back in 02 or 03. I graduated in 03. I forget exactly what semester I took it, but the one thing that stuck with me, I started my undergrad as a business student. Moved on to, after first year of not really clicking in that circle, to art history, and over summer ended up taking Anthro 101 and realizing like, wow, this can be my major, these questions are amazing, I want to do this. And soon after came controlling processes, and at that point just everything kind of got turned upside down, including my family relations. As an immigrant child from Eastern Europe, my parents thought I had gone nuts and told me we should have just stayed in Poland if you want communism so bad. Because everything was easily divided into capitalism and communism and these polar opposites, which to me, that's really not what I felt like I was saying at the dinner table. And so going back to my point of the thing that really stuck with me from those courses, from that course, was the trim tab. I just really loved the analogy of the trim tab. It's a mechanism on an ocean tanker that, requires very little work to kind of turn, and the whole darn huge ship will just start going in a different direction. You might not be able to control the currents or the sun or the wind, but you can control this little thing, and even though it doesn't make a 180 turn, it's going to start heading in a different direction. And on that note, I just wanted to say that after trying the corporate world, startup world, nonprofit world over the last 12 years, I ended up, for the last few years, having the honor of developing worker cooperatives. And to me, they have become just this total embodiment of what I believe to be a trim tab. These are not radical new ideas. Worker cooperatives have been around for many years. They function within the market system, and yet they create completely different results. The way that dollar, that money, flows through that institution and the communities has a completely different impact on who we are as workers. And thank you for bringing up, Liza, your introduction, because I never heard that. If you're not unemployed, you're self-employed, but it's gonna open my talk in June at the national, at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperative in Boston, for those of you who care to come. And I guess that's all I wanted to say, is that it's really awesome to be able to partake and to see, for example, start my morning with Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman's questions and Juan Gonzalez's questions, and see Dr. Nader's work at play. It's extremely gratifying, and it gives me hope at a time where I think sometimes that's the only thing it feels like we have left. And also, I will take the advantage of having our governor in the room and mention that we did write a law for the last 2 years that would actually legalize cooperation in the workplace. Currently, it's not so easy to actually legally be a cooperative. And we put together AB 1161. Unfortunately, the main sponsor from previous cycle, Nancy Skinner, wasn't able to take it up this year. But we do hope that there's momentum in the public sphere to help us build worker cooperatives, both collective kinds like we have down the street with Berkeley Free Clinic and Cheese Board, as well as full enterprises where democracy could be representational. We're also working on a credit union that will be worker-owned and operated with the hope of financing worker co-op startups. And I just feel like all this motivation that I've had over the last few years doing this started with Liza and Dr. Nader, and it feels really awesome. So thank you.
The gentleman in the hat next to the wall. Keep going, Chris, back to the orange wall.
Hello, my name is Cameron Waller. I started my undergraduate degree in 2005, working in peace and conflict studies. And it wasn't until my second semester that I took controlling processes. And of course, my first semester I started thinking critically, but it wasn't until my second semester that I really started figuring things out. But I went to Berkeley disengaged the whole time. I didn't really know my place. I just sort of went through and enjoyed myself, but and got the tools slowly for starting to think critically. Then I graduated in 2008. One of the biggest things I took with me was in my peace and conflict studies degree was I learned to despise politics, so I gave that up. Gave up that pursuit. I wasn't sure what I wanted in life, and I thought, engaging in the world and being a part of in the political sphere would be something that I would enjoy, but I found that wasn't really what I wanted. And after that, I moved down to LA, started pursuing music. That's something I felt was real, much more close to my heart. And down there I found that at first I was very unemployed. Then after a while I started to discover, I started to become more self-employed. Didn't really have an income the whole time. Was really living, someone was mentioning, living beneath my means. I didn't have an income. I was, living off food money from the state, and I really started to learn more about myself. And at first, I felt ashamed, and then I started to remember these ideas that came to me from Berkeley and controlling processes in particular. Someone was also mentioning how to have faith in one's own beliefs, and I started to realize that a lot better, and take confidence in myself and the way I lived life, and I learned what I wanted most out of life for once, and it took me getting out of Berkeley to really realize my own mind, but the process began in 2006 with Professor Nader's course. And again, I wish I would have been engaged more when I was in your class. I mentioned to you earlier I only got a B. not that getting an A is the important thing. It's just I feel like I got a B because I didn't know how to engage myself properly in the class. And I wish I would have realized how to do that back then. But I'm thankful for the genesis then that brought me to where I am now. And now I'm strong on my own, and I don't know where I'm going in my civic life, anything like that, but I know that it starts with me, and I can only be a member of society, a productive member of society, when I'm strong myself. And that comes with being confident in the truths that you hold within yourself. And I began to learn that there's no such thing really as absolute truth. I did a lot of reading after school, a lot more reading than I ever did in school. I think 1984 and Brave New World were just about the only 2 books I read when I was at Berkeley. But I read a lot more and learned, you know. Yeah, but it doesn't stop there, and I've kept going, and I've become a student in life after the fact, and that's the important part. And I hope to be going back to school eventually. Don't know what to study yet, but that's the important part. Yeah. Thank you.
So I was introduced to Laura Nader as a junior in an anthropology theory course at Kansas State University in 1995. And I actually had to write a paper on an anthropologist, and I went into the professor's office and said, I haven't read enough anthropologists to know who to pick. And he goes, well, your name is Laura, so how about you write about Laura Nader? And he was crafty, so I suspect there was a little more behind it than that. But I actually had a tough semester, so I took it incomplete. And so I spent that Christmas vacation, about 3 weeks, in my brother's empty apartment with cardboard boxes as furniture. And I had every paper I could get my hands on, and internet. Somehow I found some random comments on the internet. This is before Google. And I had stacks and stacks, and I inhaled Laura's life work and wrote a paper and fell in love with her controlling processes work. And fell in love with her rambunctious attitude that was present even in her academic work. Was able to come to a summer research program that summer and be her research assistant and work with her, and hyperventilated outside her office door before I came in when I first had to meet her.
You're not the only one.
What came to grad school and graduated from here in 2005 and could fill volumes, as could most of us or all of us, with the wisdom I gained in the process of working with this amazing woman. But I want to say 2 things. One is the gratitude I feel for the last couple days and how much it's recharged my batteries to be in conversation and listen to the comments of the speakers and just to be in this environment, and thank you for that. And the second thing is, in terms of thinking about pedagogy and civic life, of all those volumes, to me, the most relevant insight that she would always remind us of is you should talk to people you disagree with. And I think that involves translating it into forms they can understand. And it also means finding ways to work against technologies that increasingly cause everyone, including us, to only talk to people we agree with. Google search, algorithm reconfiguration, Facebook, social networking, and it's hard to work against those. So I think that is really one of the major tasks in front of us.
The gentleman against the wall near the window, Chris.
My name is Ignacio Chapela. I am an aspiring teacher, and I did not have the privilege of age or situation to have sat in one of Laura's classes. I came to Berkeley to do research and to teach in biology, which is the field where I have dedicated to train and to develop scholarship for more than 30 years, and I still aspire to become also a biologist. And as such, I thought I was coming to a lecture by Laura on pedagogy and citizenship. And I understood very quickly when I saw the layout of the room and the situation that that was not going to happen, but I understood what was going on. And so I welcomed the invitation to reflect on pedagogy and citizenship in this context, which is the context that was generated because, and thanks to Laura and her way of doing things. Not that I haven't had enough experience with Laura's teaching, I am particularly interested on the reciprocity aspects of pedagogy and the effects, the transformative effects on the teacher that teaching brings with it. And so I have learned a lot from Laura. I've seen a lot of her teaching on the floor of the Faculty Senate, where the booming voice saying, Laura Nader, Anthropology on microphone, sets people's faces to blush and their knees to shake. And the degree of blushing and the strength of the shaking is a measure of how much people expect to be exposed and pointed out by the sharp analysis. I've also seen her teaching in the resonating waves that spread across campus. My office sits exactly in the antipodes of this campus from her office, in the part where VP and the biologists sit. And yet the waves of resonance, of scholarship, of wisdom from Laura's office that embraces paper and ink and cotton and wood and resists the rare earth minerals of computers and iPods resonate and come in the form of shell-shocked young people. And I really know the syndrome of the person sitting in front of me in silence, realizing something very deep. And I say, you're just coming from talking to Laura Nader, right? So I learned through that process, and I grow through that process. But I wanted to just share the reflection of the moment, of the here, that I feel a pedagogue could have as a goal to become redundant. Not irrelevant, in fact more relevant because one doesn't have to be there to have the teaching happen. And I just feel that's precisely the situation that has been generated here through this masterful way of teaching. So I think what we are doing together here is a masterclass of Laura Nader's, in which I have been watching Laura through this process. Laura doesn't have to say a single word for us to be teaching ourselves. So I just wanted to reflect on that as I think the best example of what she does all the time with all of us. And I do notice that she has used a couple of words, but the words that she keeps using are thank you.
Well, I am not an old student of Laura. I just basically have known her since last year. We met in some conference some years ago. You probably don't remember, but it was last year that I came here for Nancy's class, and we were together in a party for an hour or two, and it looked like we have been friends from ever and intellectual companions. And she treated me like a colleague, like an equal. And that's how she invited me to talk here, and I'm still in a daze how she could just introduce me to her colleagues and her family and her students like this. So I am a very recent colleague of hers. But what I would like to say is, yesterday at the dinner time, Jerry Brown mentioned Gregory Bateson, and for him how the university forgets the eternal verities. And these Platonic verities, for me, I mean, recently they have been articulated very well by this French philosopher Badiou, where he says that truth takes place in like 4 domains, essentially: the domain of knowledge, which is where you have the body of your life, and then the domain of artistic creation, and the domain of political action, which you have shown also, and the domain of love, which is obvious here from your family and And I think, and then the Illich quote also, the Illich for whom kind of really the table is the altar, and an open table is the only basic essential duty of Christianity. And for many of us, like Jerry Brown and myself, studying the Jesuit with Christians who we substitute our religious beliefs for anthropology, for writing, I think that is the subject of truth that you are showing to us, as we can perceive here, in which we really, in this world of such tremendous differences, of so much poverty, this Jesuit tradition, the atheist Jesuits, as I call them, and I met a few of them among the Basques, I think this is the only real truth which we have to bear witness to, in which humanity is a single thing. There are these untouchable verities, and there has to be an open table for everyone because life is sacred, and that's the truth you have shown us. Thank you very much.
Next is Mike Lowy.
My name is Mike Lowy. I'm a student of Laura's. I came to Berkeley in 1965. My wife Ruth. I was part of the Comparative Village Law Project. There's an aspect of Laura's work that I think has not necessarily been covered today, and that is that she is able to organize a group of scholars to work cooperatively and collaboratively rather than to be at each other's throats. And there's a number of people who aren't here today, unfortunately. Klaus Koch, Carl McCarthy, Sylvia Foreman, who else? June Starr. And these are people who were very important in my education because we learned from each other under Laura's supervision. She would have Klaus go over my dissertation and show me how to write English. Of course, he was from Prussia. And I think one thing that stood out for me is that after I finished my PhD, I wound up going native and became a lawyer. And when a group of attorneys were doing a housing case in Oakland, Laura said, we have a graduate student from Papua New Guinea named Wari Yamo. And Wari became a paralegal and worked on a case and actually studied us. So we came full circle, and I think that was very important. There's one other thing I want to mention, I'll be brief. In terms of being a civic scholar, I've been teaching at the Anza College, community college, for about 32 years. And I've figured out that I've probably had about 3,000 students. And in every single class I wind up teaching. I've taught 5 different law classes to paralegals. I always manage to get in 2 anecdotes. And I think this is something we all should do. Those of us who are fortunate enough to be able to teach should, don't be afraid. And one of the things I talk about is the McDonald's case, McDonald hamburger case. And I asked the students what they think the case was about, and how is it that everybody knows the McDonald case and not any other case. And it's very enlightening because it really shows that how the powers that be are able to manipulate people into thinking that the law, that laws that are in their own self-interest wind up being dismissed as being like money grubbing, and it's not so. It's just the opposite. And the other example actually involves the governor, Rose Bird. I believe the governor appointed Rose Bird the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in California. And it turns out that in East Palo Alto there's a law clinic, and Rose Bird went there to volunteer. And apparently the story goes that one day somebody, one of the head attorney in the office said, "Who's that in the copy room?" And the other attorney said, "Well, this is a woman named Rosie." It turned out it was Rose Bird. She had come to volunteer, and she wound up making copies because that's how she could help. And I think that I tell my students this, 3,000 people have heard this, because it gives them an opportunity to understand what being a civic-minded person is all about. So anyway, and that's what I do in my classes. On a personal level, Ruth and I, are just very delighted to be here, and we've enjoyed all the years together, and we hope to have many more. And that's it. Thank you.
Next is the woman sitting next to Professor Allison Dundas. Sorry, to your right, Chris. Video.
Hello, my name is Maya Supak and actually went to De Anza College. I transferred from De Anza in 2007 as a PAC student, and I was looking more at the global world, and I wanted to combat global issues and look at that. And it wasn't until I took controlling processes that Laura made me think more of the United States first, starting here in America first. And along those lines, also as a transfer student, I did feel overwhelmed. Definitely a different type of learning at this campus. And I remember one time in class of over 300 students, there was this one student in particular that talked very, very academically in a way that was still very new to me at the time. And I remember one time he formatted a question that was so convoluted, the whole class was sort of stuck, and they're thinking, what did he just ask? And Laura, or Professor Nader, pardon me, said, I apologize. Professor Nader said, why don't you think about that question and come back to me when you could ask it the way that you would ask your grandma. And I thought that was brilliant. And from that moment on, it changed my complete level of, I just felt so much, I felt calm. I just felt that I could do this. I could get through Berkeley, and I can do great things now because I don't have to be afraid of how I ask questions and what language I ask them in, even if it's still in English. So I took controlling processes. I started focusing more on U.S. issues, even within a global studies major. And when I graduated, I remember I was talking to my husband, Gabriel, and I was thinking, what can I do with my life? I still haven't figured out what I wanted to do. And he's like, you just have to choose. And so that kind of sounded like Professor Nader, just go for it. So I started pursuing work in the anti-human trafficking field. Eventually, I started working with the district attorney's office, and I currently coordinate their anti-human trafficking work here in Alameda County. And right now, just thinking of how do we teach, and also in the civic realm, currently we're trying to teach community members, law enforcement, service providers, how to look at domestic minor sex trafficking, girls who are out there on International Boulevard in Oakland who are being sold for sex every night. We're trying to teach everyone to think of it that these are children who are being prostituted, who are being exploited, and not child prostitutes. And so thinking about how, even the controlling processes of how to, I'm just looking at the media, the way that we represent women, the way that we represent pimping, and we glorify pimping. This is all in the teaching that we are creating right now within our program. And I really want to thank you for the way you've had me really craft my worldview from there. So now that I'm thinking about going back to school, pursuing a PhD, I want to use the tools that you gave me to continue further studying this issue. And I'm still trying to figure out how do I marry practice with theory, because that's really important to me. I don't want to just be an academic and think from a high tower. I definitely want to figure out how do I inform practice with theory, which both are very genuine and necessary. So thank you very much for impacting my life so greatly.
Answer that, Asha. How does one merge theory and practice?
Thank you. I heard 5 things today. 1, the pedagogy of investigation. The premise here is that the public is constituted through debate and discussion. So fieldwork becomes foundational because anthropology does not have theoretical assumptions. It is fieldwork as its logical foundation. We don't judge the work. We find it as it is, and we engage to change it. Second is method of presentation. Anthropology's greatest problem, except for Malinowski and Laura Nader, has been in presentation. We find amazing things, and we dumb them down or dull them down beyond recognition. And that's to resist back theory. Because we have to trust originality to find what we've established in terms of findings to present in a way that they change. Malinowski and Marx had something in common. They emphasized the fundamental importance of method of presentation. But most anthropologists are not taught how to write. And that's the second. The third issue is communication. Communication is not the same as writing academically. And that has got two components. One, how do we communicate in class? Second, how do we communicate in public? When I taught for 10 years, you have been Laura's students, I am a Laura student. It's a fundamental difference. But I used to get people to speak 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and 15 minutes with a stopwatch. They hated it at that time. And subsequently, because if you can find 2 minutes on television, that's equivalent of $10 million. But we need to be precise and disciplined. And the next issue is mobilization, because that's where it comes to practice. Having done those three, the issue becomes mobilization is a different language. You know, I've just been through 23 provinces of Afghanistan, and each one requires adjusting. You know, I talk to Obama, and I talk to peasants. Without being able to talk about mobilization in distinctive ways and being able to take 4 minutes to tell the President of the United States what's wrong with his policy, or 15 minutes to mobilize somebody whose wife has been stolen from him, and he needs to pay $1,000 to get her back. That's the art of mobilization. And then the last issue, the fifth one I heard a lot about, is government. The word governance was invented in the academy. Carson, who wrote the first book, wrote about governing the university. And this has been completely lost sight of. It was 1961. What is governance different than administration, and why is governance different than ruling? Because it takes stakeholders seriously. And it brings it together, because then the space is opened up. And the question of issues of governance are precisely that. Having done those others, and here I think the challenge comes. Anthropology has two tendencies. One is to become subordinate. So it interacts with lawyers, it becomes subordinate to law. It interacts with the military, it becomes subordinate to the military. Because then it's the inferiority complex. But the other is a synthetic quality that is field dated. You know, I've worked with lawyers, engineers, economists, etc. And one has to be able to frame it back within the logic of citizen engagement. Then anthropology's power truly comes as transformational mechanism. Because in that domain, you don't take today as the continuation of yesterday, but as a break for the future. And that's where the logic of practice really changes. Practice is not separate from theory because all people carry various theories. But we need to engage in this to be able to move forward. So thank you for it.
Next, we have on the queue Professor Marianne Fermé from our Anthropology department here.
Thank you. I'm Marianne Fermé. I'm a colleague of Laura's in this department. I also represent Berkeley High School on the Planning and Oversight Committee of the Berkeley school excellent program. And I say this because, so in other words, I'm involved in city Board of Education politics. The reason I say this is to stress the way in which having as colleagues people like Laura and others who have refused to draw a separation between the politics of knowledge and engagements of other kinds has made it possible for many of us to engage in these ways. And following an honored tradition in the department, I've chosen to follow the money. In other words, to serve on the committee that supervises the expenditure of extra monies that Berkeley taxpayers have imposed on themselves as a levy to supplement the retreat of state funding from public education, at least for the Berkeley Unified School District. Having said that, I'd like to say that even though I never took a class with Laura, I was once delegated by then Chair Rosemary Joyce to controlling processes to collect some wording for a nomination for a teaching award of Laura's. And therefore I did have the pleasure, unlike many of her colleagues, to actually sit in on a couple of these classes. And I was struck by the way she could take an item in a newspaper, a recent major event, and make that the centerpiece of an anthropological lecture. And it's been a truly inspiring way to move away from what Paulo Freire called the container model of education, in which teachers take things and try to fill students' heads as though they were empty boxes, and instead take on a kind of partnership role in conjunction with students, in which education really becomes a dialogue. And I've always been struck by the way Laura has been able to mobilize students' enthusiasm, and many of you have spent a lot of hours in this department working with Laura, not under her or not being taught by her, doing really important pieces of research that ended up being part of her own published work and being recognized in those roles as respected intellectual partners. So I think, Laura, the sheer presence of and sort of tenor of the comments that are coming out of this room today speaks for itself. But I sure hope that if I teach for what will total amount to 50 years, I'll be able to command a fraction of this turnout and of these comments. So, congratulations.
Next we have the gentleman in the green shirt.
Hello, my name is Larry Mitchlack, and I was a graduate student under Laura Nader in the 1970s. After that, I went to work for the Middle East Center, where I was the vice chair, and I taught in Middle Eastern studies. So I'm the graduate student that wouldn't go away, and I'm still here. I'd like to talk about three things that I learned from Laura Nader that are pedagogical. And the first thing is that I had several classes with Laura Nader. I had the 240 class when I was a graduate student. I had a two-person seminar about Ibn Khaldun with Laura Nader. I was Laura Nader's TA for Middle East Anthropology. And I remember that especially because she used to come with the newspaper, and at the beginning of the class, she would vent about whatever had happened most recently in the Middle East, but in an anthropological way. And when she taught about the Middle East, she would always make it relevant to what was going on in the present. I remember she liked to teach about mediation in Lebanon, where instead of in the American legal system where one person is right and the other person is wrong, and where a person is either guilty or not guilty, here in the Middle East they were always looking for mediation. They weren't interested in who was right and who was wrong. They were interested in what was a solution that people could live with. And you know, I thought that that was the first lesson I learned from her, was that you have to make what you teach relevant. You have to make anthropology relevant to what's going on right now, or else it's useless. So relevance. The second thing is that I remember that a lot of graduate students were intimidated by Laura because she has this deep voice and she has this piercing look and she would frighten graduate students. But I rapidly learned that the people that she really respected were the people that would disagree with her, because she's always writing an article or getting a talk ready, and she's always bouncing ideas off people. And she likes it when her ideas get refined. So she liked it when people would refine her ideas. I can remember, and I suppose this dates me, when Carter had just been elected, and Laura was talking to some of us, and she said, "This is terrible. This is terrible, these people that he's going to choose for his cabinet secretaries." And he hadn't appointed anybody yet. And I said, "Laura," I said, "he hasn't appointed anybody yet. You're criticizing the man for things that he hasn't even done yet." And she said, "Yes, but we know what his short lists are." And a couple of days later, she was lecturing in Anthro 3, and she said, "These are terrible things that Carter is getting ready to do. These are bad people that he has on his list." And then she paused and she said, "But we should really let him choose them before we criticize him." I thought that was a great compliment, and I did learn that she liked people that disagreed with her. Okay, the third point is that I really enjoyed the last 2 days of talks that we've had. They were some wonderful speakers. And there was one moment that I thought was a Laura Nader moment, and that was at the end of the afternoon yesterday when somebody got up and they said, "Why didn't anybody see the economic crisis of 2008, 2009 coming down the pipe? Why was it that everybody was taken by surprise?" And Robert Reich, who is a wonderful scholar, said, "That's not true. Lots of people saw it coming. They saw it coming. And they were hoping that the government would bail them out. And guess what happened? The government bailed them out." I thought this was a Laura Nader moment because she always questions the premises. She always questions the premises of the question. And one of the things that she taught us was to question everything. Don't take anything for granted. So that was the third thing that I think was an important pedagogical principle that all of us learned from her. And we very much value the experience of being students of Laura Nader. Thank you, Laura.
Right. I just love everything I've heard today, and I could talk for an hour on each one because it popped up. Sylvia Foreman, case in point. I'm a 1977 Anthropology of Law undergraduate. Went off to graduate school and worked with Sylvia Foreman. I was scared stiff to interact with Laura as an undergraduate, and it wasn't until I got to graduate school and worked with Sylvia Foreman that I began to understand why Laura and Sylvia worked well together. Both of them being people who had no patience for meandering about, let's get things done. The notions of social responsibility, of anthropological citizenship were key. I think all of us read and memorized Studying Up, Down, and Sideways and the challenges especially of the 70s, and that certainly has structured my life. I've been greatly gifted by having that relationship with Sylvia, because Sylvia made me, especially when she was dying, say, "You report to Laura." You let her know what you're doing. You ask your questions to her. And it is true, I've done this ever since. The idea of being able to stand up and say, "Dare I analyze what's going on in the relationships between human rights and the environment and work with the United Nations to try and make these things happen? Can I really study and see and pull out and articulate what the value and meaning of life is in the Marshall Islands, where nuclear weapons have destroyed a whole way of life? You know, can I work with massacre survivors in Guatemala and demonstrate the relationships between the World Bank and the flow of money and the funding of genocide? Can I do this in ways that doesn't get me killed, let alone the people I'm working with?" Well, those conversations happen first and foremost with the notion of how do you do a methodology of analysis that says not only what you're studying, how you're studying, why you're studying. So that notion of the architecture of power, of the genealogy of power, right? and the control ways that the ideology of power and how those dynamics work over time. How do you identify the loci of power? So that you can jump in and understand that in times of ulcerating crisis, you also have immense opportunity for transformative change. How do you engage? And why do you engage? And so all of that to say that to me, the power of Laura Nader's work and what we've been hearing today is the many ramifications of a methodology for pursuing what it is we do, but more importantly, of an individual as well as societal sense of social responsibility. So I don't think that there's been anyone more important in my life and many of our lives in terms of giving us the tools and the means and the reasons and the rationale, but especially the generosity of just being able to show up unannounced and knock on the door and say, hey, here I am, make time for me, let me report, and her giving back. You know, so thank you, thank you, thank you.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk was to prove that anthropologists can speak in 2 to 3 minutes. So I'm Seth Holmes. I'm on faculty here in the School of Public Health. I'm an anthropologist. So I'll tell 2 quick stories. The first one was when I was in medical school at UCSF. I read several of the articles that Professor Nader wrote. I think I can call you Laura Nader now that I'm on faculty. One that moved me especially was controlling processes, and I remember that was part of the reason that I ended up doing a PhD in anthropology over here. I remember thinking that I would much rather read 25 or 30-page articles by anthropologists who are thinking very critically about what's going on in the world than 4-page articles in medicine or most of public health that don't think very critically. I remember the first time I went into Professor Nader's office, Laura Nader's office, during office hours, and I was trying to decide what I should do. I talked about some of the things that interested me, you know, critical studies of development and immigration studies and things like that. And I asked you what I should study, and what I remember you saying was go into one of these areas that interests you. You will find something that makes you indignant. I remember that was the word, indignant. And then go study that. Try to figure out what's going on. Why is that happening? Why are certain categories of people being treated in certain ways? I teach your controlling processes article now in my theory class in the School of Public Health, and I tell that story, and that's the end of 3 minutes.
Next is Chris Hebden.
My name is Chris Hebden. I was an undergraduate here, and I TA'd for Professor Nader's courses, including controlling processes and her energy course, several semesters. So I want to share with you some things that I learned. And it's impossible to mention all of the little Naderisms, as Liza Grande has taught me to think of them as, which are so important even in the cookbook that the family made. In the back of the book are little Naderisms about 1 cup of coffee, 10 minutes of conversation at the family restaurant. So it would be hard to recount all of the little things that have made all the courses that I've taken with Professor Nader so engaging. From the very first time I went into her office after about 8 weeks in Liza Grandia's office, Liza encouraging me, go, 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 you can do it, she won't bite. And the first thing Professor Nader asked me was, okay, well, where do you come from? And I think I gave her 15 minutes, for which I probably owe her a lot. And the next thing was, okay then, what makes you angry? And you know what? I don't know how many people had asked me, but not enough people had asked me that question. And I had some things to say at that point at 19 or 20 years old. And that was the beginning of something. For me, it was the beginning of anthropology. Then as TA in her class, I saw again and again some of the things that I saw when I first walked into the class controlling processes. One of them was, this is a room of 300 students from which there is no advertising to get them there. They've been told by word of mouth from other people that, oh, you have to take this class. And apparently a lot take that advice. I was told by a student in political science when I asked what class to take, she said, take controlling processes, it'll change your life. And I later wrote to her and said, you know what, this has shifted my life a lot. And the mode of presentation in that class, I think, is really important. The readings, for example, you may be able to interpret them as reflecting concerns that Foucault or Gramsci or other theorists have had, but they're not Foucault and Gramsci. They are literature, and they're little articles from the newspaper, and they're things that you might see in your daily life if you're paying attention, and if you know how to use the library. And so there's, in that class for the students, I think a lot of messages in the subtext. I think the biggest thing that I want to say after 4 or 5 years TAing for these courses is that it's taught me a lot about respect. And it's taught me a lot about what it means to respect students for Laura Nader. And I think even her students learn, even her undergraduate students learn a lot about respect after being in her courses. One thing is, another observation about this course is that one of the things the TAs hear very early on in the course is students coming up saying, I'm terrified, I have no idea how to take notes. Liza Grandia, actually, who was my GSI and mentor, had to give us instructions on how to take notes in this course because the teaching happens through stories. And the students feel captivated by the stories because no one ever really tells them stories, but tries to fill them like a bucket. So suddenly we have stories being told, and the students don't know how to put the pencil on the paper. So Liza told us, sit and listen, and when you feel a break, you know, write something down. Take your summary. So this lecture course is really a series of stories tied together with anthropology being woven into all of it, and the students learning a lot. Well, one thing I learned, and it really stood out in my memory, was that there was an interview in Cal magazine in 2000, which I encourage you to look up, and I'd be happy to send somebody copies. We use it in seminars that we've been teaching. And it's with Professor Nader after the 2000 election. And she recalls in there that a colleague at Santa Cruz says, the way that I teach is I seduce my students into believing what I believe. And in the interview, Professor Nader says, now I know what I do. I irritate. I think that says so much for a professor who's known to, though intimidating is a word that's thrown around a lot, also extraordinarily kind and extraordinarily tough. But the toughness is, I think her students would attest, not for your harm, but for your betterment. So I remembered several times in her courses, students asking questions with a very mean tone of voice, or with a lot of ignorance behind their questions. And we graduate students, or TAs, you know, I've turned to Brad Erickson, who's here, and Leticia Cesarino, who also co-taught, and others, and we've turned to each other and started to put on our boxing gloves when we heard the students asking these questions. And Professor Nader never did that. We multiple times turned to each other and said, wow, we couldn't have answered the question like that, because she took it very calmly and with a lot of respect for if for the future independent thinkers that each of these students could become. And it was a statement by a general or Margaret Mead, some anthropologists told some generals, I think, never humiliate the enemy after the wars. And of course, the student is not the enemy, but in general, I have never seen Professor Nader humiliate a student. She's has a lot of respect and a lot of patience. And I think part of that is a feeling in her courses like we are always in the field, that this course is a place to study and learn, and you walk outside and you can find things to intrigue you and stimulate your mind. And so I want to say two other things real brief.
Okay, real quick.
Yeah.
We've got, the queue has been added too, so there's now 13 people and there are 10 minutes less than when I last said that, so quick.
So I think there's a lot of these things that are really liberating to students when they hear them. Things like ethnography as theory and theory as needed. And something that I think a lot of her students have felt is that they feel more free to think independently and like better citizens. So I think that's something many have appreciated, and I certainly have as well.
The woman in the front row, please.
Thank you. Well, it's incredible to stand in the presence of such amazing individuals, so accomplished and driven, and to know that we all come together on one point, and that is in honor of Laura Nader. My name is Dominique, or Nikki Alex, and I'm a former student of Professor Nader's. I entered her Energy, Culture, and Society class by chance, and was really inspired by it, and was told by a fellow student to take controlling processes the following semester, because if I liked Energy, Culture, and Society, CP would be like the mothership of knowledge. So I walked into class and I had my reader, and my mind was blown within the first couple sessions. The readings affected me and affected the students that I spoke with because they related to our lives, but also gave an analytical framework that I hadn't seen before presented that way. These readings I've shared with friends that are not in the academy. I have shared them with friends in academies in Cairo and in Copenhagen, and have been told that these readings are something that that will influence their lives. And that's just one or two of the readings that come from this amazing reader. Senior class of 2010, which I was a part of, asked us, the Anthro department asked us to share a defining moment in our experience at Cal. And it came to me pretty quickly that a feeling for the organism, which was a book that we read, and I remember sitting in class, and all of a sudden, while hearing Laura Nader talk, it dawned on me that the norm is just a structure in itself. And so I can operate around that and outside of that. And being in class and talking with friends, I had 6 friends in the class, and we used to have Nader nights where we would sit in my room and we would discuss articles, because of course we should discuss the articles for the upcoming class. And we would start talking, and we would set aside maybe an hour for discussion, and we would talk long into the night about how it affected us and how frustrated we were and how we saw it in our society and how impacted we were by these articles and by the lectures. So I graduated in 2010, I moved on to Copenhagen University for grad school, and immediately saw institutional controls. And controlling processes is so valuable and so amazing and so frustrating because you take it with you everywhere and you see it everywhere you go. And I think that really speaks to the value of the course, because if it defines your retina and your view of the world, that is a serious impact. So basically, what I want to say is to Professor Nader, you were committed to your students, you invested in us, and we really truly felt it, and you have touched this generation also. Thank you.
Next is the woman against the wall with the coral turtleneck.
It's interesting because you just speak of Denmark, and so somehow or another this is related to this. I'm a one only town. What is the expression? Anyway, I want to give you my film because now it's out on a new DVD. I don't have to say anything more. It's a film about Highlander Folk School and the process of empowerment. I made it in '85, and it's more relevant now than it was then. And Miles Horton started at the Danish folk schools. He was in Copenhagen, he was in Denmark, and he saw the way that the Danish folk schools were important in empowering people to understand the power of their own experience, their own culture, and he came back to the South to start a school called Highlander Folk School, which has been going since 1932, and it's still going. And I'm happy to give that to you, and I love being here, and I love your class.
Hi, my name is Adrienne Pine. I won't go into all of the ways in which Laura Nader has really been behind every step of my professional career. But I moved to DC in June of 2009 to start my position at American University as a tenure track assistant professor. I say that because I've been risking my tenure ever since. A week after I moved there, a coup happened. A military coup happened in Honduras, which is the country where I've done research, supported by the United States all the way. And so my experience of DC from the very start has been going to Congress, to the hearings about what's going, to find out what's being said, going to the State Department, organizing protests outside the State Department, going and meeting with people sometimes on the same day that I'm organizing protests, going to the OAS, and I immediately began studying up in a way that I never had before. And it was shocking to me to discover the specific processes by which our democracy is usurped on a daily basis in Congress, in the State Department, and how that relates to the way that we usurp the democracy of people around the world, whether that be in the Middle East. I lived in Cairo, thanks to Laura Nader, for 2 years right prior to that, or in Honduras. And inspired by Laura's fearlessness, I started viciously attacking the State Department at every opportunity that I could get, publishing articles, writing on a blog, and to my surprise, it got results. I started not only getting attacked from within the State Department and from within Congress, but I started getting hate mail, which was one of the most exciting things that could have happened to me, because I remember going to Laura's office and hearing about the hate mail that came in about Ralph and saying, "Can you believe this?" And looking over them and thinking, wow, I hope one day I'll get hate mail too. And it was really an eye-opening process, because I've never been a fan of the US government and the ways that corporate the corporatocracy controls us, but really understanding it in person was such an important experience. And I felt like I kept rereading and rereading Studying Up, and it's such an honor to be in a place, not an honor, but I'm just so damn lucky to be in a city where I can assign my students to go to congressional hearings and have them come back to me and tell me exactly how democracy was silenced, and which is what they always discover. Even people who go in there open-minded discover that, and so it's just such an incredible honor to have Laura Nader with me wherever I go in DC, wherever I go in Honduras, whatever I'm doing to. You know, to really struggle against these corporate forces that are controlling us. And Laura chastises me sometimes for not being in touch enough. And part of why I'm not in touch enough is that I just feel like until I've overthrown corporate control of our lives, I'm not worthy. But I'm working through that. And I'm so honored to have worked with you and to continue that relationship.
I'm the next on the queue. My name is Monica Eppinger, and I was a student of Professor Nader, who's graduated in 2010. I now teach law in St. Louis at a Jesuit university called St. Louis University. And I wanted to say two things about unintended consequences. And this reflects on some reading that Professor Nader turned me on to by Gregory Bateson, who talks about causality. Talks about two kinds of causality, conditional causality and precipitating causality. So if you ask the question, why is there a fire burning? One answer is because there's oxygen in the room. Another answer is because somebody lit a match. And in my life, she has been both. The conditional causality started for me, and I thank the people who worked on the Berkeley Village Law Project, reading in Law and Culture and Society in 1990 when I was a research assistant for a guy at Harvard Law School. This guy's name was Abe Shays. He represented the country of Nicaragua when Nicaragua sued the United States for mining the harbors. And I went to work for him because he specifically wanted me to read Anthropology, and he wanted me to read Laura Nader. And I read Laura Nader for a year for him and produced briefs for him. I went on to have a career in the State Department. And the last thing that Abe Shays said to me before I went to start with the State Department was, we really need anthropologists of law. That's what we need in the world. It was always the road not taken, and I'm not sure if I had read a different anthropologist of law that I would have been as taken with that advice. But in any case, having read Law in Culture and Society, in particular her introduction to that, was part of the conditional causality that was setting things up for me without my even realizing it. There's unintended consequences there. I had a sabbatical semester in 2000. I had 3 months of leave from the State Department, and I came to Berkeley to audit her class, where I met Liza Grandia and Adrian Pine, the friend of the State Department. You can imagine this little class, right? There were 7 of us, and look who came out, right? This is Professor Nader all over the place. And that set up more conditional causality for me. So again, developing more thinking, being exposed to more, being exposed to controlling processes, being controlled to studying up, being exposed to harmony ideology. And in the end, the precipitating causality for me came not for a career change, and going into anthropology as a career came not from Professor Nader. That wasn't what struck the match. What struck the match for me was being asked to violate my oath to protect and defend the Constitution in the State Department. And I was asked to do something specifically that would have violated my oath, and that's when I quit. But the thing was that I had something that I could do that I had always wanted to do and I had always yearned to do, which was to be an anthropologist of law. So I came to Berkeley, and I got to make the other dream come true for me. Second example of unintended consequences. So for me, one was this reading Law and Culture and Society, and then ending up making this career switch. Second law of unintended consequences, you just never know how these things are going to come up. Last week at my law school in St. Louis, we sponsored a symposium where we invited, again, following the advice, talk to the people that you disagree with. we invited a man named Representative Kurtman, who's a state legislator in Missouri, who's sponsoring what is referred to as anti-Sharia legislation in our state legislature. And we invited him to our law school to explain to us what was his reasoning behind this legislation and what we thought might be some of the unintended consequences of that. And then we had public, it was open to the public, of course, and a woman who was completely veiled in hijab stood up at the end of the forum. The last thing that she said, she had the last word, and she said, who gets to say whether the marriage that I want to engage in or the law that I want to govern my contracts, who gets to say whether that's legal or illegal? And I said, there's an anthropologist named Laura Nader who wrote about the user theory of law. In our system, law is generated from the bottom up. You get to say, if you do it. If you don't do it, then they get to say. That's it. Okay, next person. The woman in orange against.
Monica.
The woman, yes, that woman who stood up there. That orange, yes, you. Yes, that's you.
I want to see orange. My name is Madeline Landau, and I'm at the Institute of Governmental Studies right now. And I have a general comment about some underutilized potential of all the work Dr. Nader has fostered, nurtured on controlling processes and studying up from the standpoint of progressive political strategy. So my comment is more looking forward. And I'll just, to give a little context, the context for my comment is that I've been studying how philanthropic and governmental reform initiatives have shaped social change advocacy in the United States. I mean, we know that all political systems shape agenda definition and the menu of acceptable solutions. But in advanced welfare states, the agents of that process really changed and became highly professionalized. And the point of that comment is that as a result, a huge range of the most important political decisions really occur in the domain of, quote, management theory or management affairs. And Dr. Nader is really, in my perspective, one of the only social scientists in American studies who has consistently pointed attention and encouraged study of these management frameworks, which have grown increasingly dominant in their impact on our governance since the post-60s period. And I'm referring to frameworks of efficiency, especially of innovation, institutional innovation, policy innovation, civic innovation, as well as some of the more specific methodologies, cost-benefit, risk management, and so on. And these really sort of, all these phenomenon fall between the traditional area of public administration and politics. So often they're not really being caught by either of those fields, although they are where so much of the political and institutional energy really is occurring. I think that we also need to extend a focus on these frameworks specifically to the shaping of civic life. You know, we've looked at them in terms of the shaping of overt public policies or political ideology and so on, but they have a broader shaping of the formation of collective identities, of basic community organizations, of coalitions. There's been an enormous penetration of civic life. So I think progressive frameworks have a tendency to think that, quote, the grassroots, any activity of the grassroots is natural or it's naturalized, and we really need to start looking at the penetration of top processes and what we are calling community or civic development. And then a quick comment, I just have to take my own shot very quickly at how do we link theory or analysis to practice. I want to throw out from my experience, because I have done work at both of the levels I'm going to mention, that we really need work at the top and at the bottom. I think there's a tendency among progressive thinking about strategy, to assume there's a more open space for political mobilization in an advanced state than really exists, without there being an institutional infrastructure of support at many levels. Otherwise, the risks and the constraints and the isolation of activists tend to make it very difficult to move into broader participation. So I think we need to start thinking more about how you get an infrastructure of support that is defending critiques of these kinds of management theories and professional methodologies within the institutions, and focus more on the link between the work at the top and the work at the bottom. And in my view, Dr. Nader is one of the few people who, although maybe you've not always emphasized this, who has consistently kept the focus on the linkage between the two, which is something that in the progressive focus on advocacy and outside advocacy often is losing.
Thank you very much. Hoda, you have the next word.
My name is Hoda Bandahmadi. There's probably a ton that I could say, and I have to keep it brief.
Hoda, we can't hear you. Speak into the microphone.
But I have to try and keep it brief. So one thing I wanted to bring up, an assumption I keep hearing here that I wanted to question, is I keep hearing about, during the symposium, about different mythologies, about the mythology of terrorism, and ideas that we need to figure out how to make anthropology relevant. And I think that I guess this reminded me of a couple things. One of them is that I hear that kind of question a lot as an anthropology grad student in another part of the country, with people, my fellow grad students, wondering about, whether we are even doing anything that matters, or whether we can possibly avoid being complicit in things that we don't like. And I think that for me, the answer to that is always really clear, because I've had the fortunate experience of seeing examples of how it is quite possible to be doing really good work as an anthropologist. Not just from Professor Nader, but her ability to point that out in other people. And some of those examples that I got to learn about in controlling processes are here today. I mean, J.O.'s article and Roberto Gonzalez's article on Brave New Workplace, and I mean, I could go on. And it also reminded me of a conversation I once had with Professor Nader when she was talking about, there's all this discussion about engaged anthropology and public anthropology, and they're always looking for a new word for doing, I don't know, something that matters or good or something like that in anthropology, and new euphemism for it. And I was thinking, well, why does it have to be the people who are trying to, first of all, there's a lot of things that go under those, start using those words that maybe, human terrain people might call themselves engaged anthropologists. And second of all, why does it have to be someone who's doing good work who has to be in the marked category? Shouldn't it be the people, isn't it just that they're doing relevant anthropology? And isn't that what anthropology is inherently, relevant? So maybe we should be pointing out the irrelevant anthropology instead of finding a word for the people who are doing what they're supposed to be doing in the first place. And I think that that's sort of the power for me of what Professor Nader does, is that she teaches through the example of how she lives every aspect of her life. And it throws into stark contrast the way that other people, including myself, who aspire to be able to be so honest with ourselves and other people, and to, I don't know, exhibit the same kind of kindness that Professor Nader does, aren't always able to live up to. But I think that that's one of the things that I try, I guess, aspire to do in my own work, and I guess no one other than Professor Nader could have inspired me to try and study other anthropologists, is to try and figure out how to be honest with myself about what I'm doing, what institutions I'm working in, whether it's how I'm compartmentalizing my research from my teaching, or the institution I'm working in and how it funds, I don't know, the salaries of administrators or football coaches, or places its other funding priorities. I mean, I think it's just that trying to be honest and kind, which sounds simple enough, but is so difficult sometimes to put into practice, that we can actually see through the work of Professor Nader.
We now have 11 people left in less than 20 minutes, so we're going to come down to the 1 to 2 sentence comment, if we may. I apologize. He raised his hand so long ago. I'm so sorry. It's a long line.
Well, I'm Brian Barsky. I'm a professor of computer science here. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, as a computer scientist, that gives Laura and I an immediate commonality of enormous proportions. But anyway, I wasn't even going to say anything. I wanted to just come and sit in the back and watch, because I'm such a fan of Laura, and I value her friendship, and I've learned so much from her. We have in common interests of civic engagement. And Hoda just brought up the football coach, and that's actually what has brought us together, not the football coach directly, but we ended up teaching a freshman seminar together, which may be the most unique thing I've ever done, especially as a computer scientist, but with a long title that basically was examining what's happening to the priorities. Priorities under pressure was the subtitle of the class, looking at very careful examination. And what I've learned from these last couple of days is this myth thing that has come up. I'm not an anthropologist, I'm learning so much, but that is exactly what I'm now understanding, is everything that we were doing, or now I get it, was just, it was so easy for her. I'm a computer scientist. She didn't have to learn about microprocessors. But now I get it. We just hung it down the template. I listened for 2 fascinating, inspirational days. Thank you, Laura, for bringing these inspirational people together. And now I realize it's all been the same thing. The myths, the misinformation, I don't have to tell it to you, you know it better than I do. So unfortunately, I have the person, I'm have to be quiet now. But I'll just say it's been such a wonderful addition in my life, Laura, to have you as a friend. And the last few years, the last thing I ever imagined, I've been on the faculty more than 30 years. I never imagined at this point what I would be doing is collaborating with Laura Nader on issues about plunder, I guess. So thank you so much, Laura.
Good afternoon. My name is Travis Thompson. I'm with the Regional Oral History Office here at UC Berkeley, and I just want to tell a brief story because I know there's more people. But in the spring of 2005, I was a unprepared philosophy student living out of his truck and wondering what he was going to do next after he graduated here at Berkeley. Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans in August of 2005. And then, my last semester, I enrolled in the Anthropology of Law with Professor Nader. And in that class, she asked us, brilliantly, to compare Kilo versus New London and contrast it with what the residents might be going through in New Orleans after the storm. I was excited very much because I was displaced myself, and I got a B on that ethnographic paper. And the reason I got a B, she said, was, Travis, lack of ethnographic evidence. And that irritated me. So I worked, and I worked, and I worked for the next couple weeks. And I ended up receiving an A in the class. But that statement, lack of ethnographic evidence, really got to me. So, the style of Jillian, I decided to step outside my comfort zone and decided to move to New Orleans and apply for General Motors' position in the city of New Orleans. Obviously, the person who hired me was very ignorant of the Naders and General Motors, and he said he'd love for me to come down to work for him. So I'll say this. My first challenge down there was being the liaison between the police department and General Motors, because the police department had commandeered vehicles from General Motors to arrest people during the storm. Commandeer meaning stealing. And I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid because the training and what I learned from Professor Nader when I went down there allowed me to deal with the problems at hand. I just applied for law school, and I told that story for my personal statement. And I want to say thank you for allowing me to write that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Rucha. I took controlling processes 2 years ago, and and I think that was one of, if not the most thought-provoking class I've ever taken at Cal. But I didn't actually realize how much it would affect me. I graduated a year later. I graduated last year. And this past year I've been studying criminology at Penn, which is exactly where controlling processes really comes in handy. And this past semester, a few of us took part in the Phelps Institute of Government Public Policy Challenge. And being criminologists, we decided to propose a private prison in the Philadelphia area and implement all of these vocational programs, everything really that research tells us works, but that is not implemented. We thought it was a great proposal. We were probably biased, but sure enough, the judges thought that it was too ambitious, and we didn't even get past the semifinal. It might have been a little too ambitious, but it just made me really angry because I thought, apparently, all of these political institutional controls, everything that you talked about, kind of stops people from stepping outside their comfort zone, stops them from, implementing something beyond, the safe option. Because apparently the Liberty bike share proposal got through. So that made me really angry. But at the end of the day, it just strengthened my resolve to sort of go out there, work in policy, and address, and if not challenge, all of the rampant injustice that's out there in the system today. And Dr. Nader, I really have to thank you for teaching me to think that way. Thank you.
All right, bullet points. I got 2 bullet points. One is about hair and one is about cars, or maybe hope, depending on how you see it. I was really obnoxious when I went here, and I really want to echo the statements about kindness. I had a bright orange mohawk, or maybe dreads. I'm not really certain what was going on when I was in your class. And I asked a lot of obnoxious questions, and I think I was rude to other students, and generally I was kind of a mess. Undergrad, what are you going to do? Anyhow, I came into your office, and you graciously sponsored an application for research, which was denied. And you were indignant, which was amazing and felt amazing to me. But one of the things you said to me when we were talking about this research is, if you're going to Syria, you better change your hair. So that's my funny story. Here's the meaningful story, which is about cars. Ralph Nader said in his talk yesterday, he was talking about being at symposiums about auto safety, and they would talk about drunk drivers, they would talk about seatbelts, they would talk about road conditions, but they never talked about the car. Well, my generation, you talk about pronoia. I think we're actually very depressed. I don't think we trust anybody. I don't think we believe in anything. All we see in front of us is a roadblock. We have no hope, and not hope like Obama's hope like actual hope. But we don't see the car. We don't talk about the car. We don't talk about the vehicle for what's happening. We don't look beyond that. And that's what I got from your course. And I'm now in my 3rd year of law school. I'm about to graduate. I could talk lots about what I've done, but I'll just say that in my career, in the work that I'm going to do and in the work that I've already done, I've been part of the Occupy Legal Collective and been supporting the people there. We could talk lots about that, but I'm not going to. All I'll say is that I see the car. Not only do I see it, I'm going to drive it, and I'm going to do it because I can question what's around me and I can question the law. So thank you.
My name's Scott Raber. I took controlling processes in a number of other classes many moons ago. I'm not an anthropologist now, I'm a lawyer by native. But just a few thoughts jogging together from the last couple of days, trying to tie back into here.
Can you talk into the microphone?
Absolutely, sorry. First of all, to the anthropologists in here, I wanted to say that pedagogy does matter. And it does matter well beyond the discipline. And I think that's been exemplified. We all have some experience, I think, in that in here. There are very few classes that I took here, and in law school, wherever, that spoke to power. In fact, I really can't think of any other classes that I took that consistently thought about power and the ways that we go about living, like controlling processes. And that has big ramifications, or will, for your students well beyond, in terms of, we heard, not thinking in silos and what have you, from Gillian Tett, and we heard about Hugo talking about his activism related to his disciplines. It's very important that you all think about that going forward. I'd just like to say it's quite an honor to be here. The final thought is, that comes up in the last few days, is thinking about anthropologists having a much needed public voice. We have a lot of economists, political scientists, lawyers out there who are dominating discourse in areas that they shouldn't be. And as an anecdote, many years before I started at Cal, I think my mom had seen you, I don't know if I've ever told you the story, seen you on a show being interviewed somewhere. And when it came time and I was off here, she said, oh, you should, see Professor Nader, maybe she's teaching a class. I saw her on this show. And this is the pre-YouTube era, folks, of course. So the point is, as Professor Ghani had said, you have to get out there, know who you're talking to, and be relevant. And there's no reason that anthropology can't be. It's quite an honor.
I got to Berkeley 20 years ago and have graduated in '98, and I've been teaching a version of controlling processes at my campus since spring of 2005, so going on 7 years now. And I would talk about that. That was the original plan, but so many of you have spoken to that course and the impact it's had on US people and on others. I don't think I should go that way. Instead, I thought of a course that had a deeper impact on me in some ways, and really closely related to the controlling processes class. And I think there were only 4 of us in the class. It was a graduate seminar. Anthropology in the Cold War was the title. And to me, it's unfortunate in a way that there were so few of us, but on the other hand, that was one of the beauties of it, because we got to see that period of American history in a very intimate way. And I think her method for this course, which as far as I know, it was a one-time course that was taught, but it was brilliant. What she did was to each week invite one of her colleagues in to talk to the seminar group and to have a discussion about what it was like to live as a student of anthropology or as a student of political science during the McCarthy period and during the other phases of the Cold War. And what was really fascinating was that it humanized people that I think for many of us students were almost, we were in awe of them, and it really humanized them. People like Sherry Washburn, Jerry Behrman were participants in the seminar, and it was really transformative. So for me, it gave me an appreciation of the importance of experimenting with pedagogy and trying out new things. The last thing I'll say about that is that this course also, I think, helped us students understand that we were colleagues, that we could have discussions with other faculty members, and that our ideas would be taken seriously. And the last thing I'll say here is that Professor Nader really follows this kind of apprenticeship model where you become an apprentice of her and learn from her and you're going to work hard through that process. But at the end of it all, you come out so much stronger than you would otherwise. And I think, again, this Anthropology in the Cold War seminar went on beyond just that one semester, because she then shared with us drafts of the paper that she was working on, and we were very intimately involved in that side of the research too. So it was something that was deeply educational for us, and I thank you for that.
Well, this has been a wonderful experience for me as well as for you. I just want to say, you know, a person can extend the hand, but if there's nobody to take the hand, then it doesn't matter if you extend the hand or not. So I don't take any credit. I extended the hand, but you took the hand. And basically I was fairly, and still am, fairly unself-conscious about the things that I do and the questions that I ask, and I think that's probably a good thing. I bet if I were born today and going to school, I would have been ADHD. And I'm very conscious of the fact that kids today, I mean, we basically silenced the black kids by putting the boys in jail, and we silenced the white boys by putting an ADHD, and we silence the women by making them think that the most important thing is how they look. And so there's been a lot of indirect silencing, and I've heard that over and over in the last several hours, that you felt liberated from the silencing. And I remember asking the class, I'd say something and they'd say, well, thank you. People told me that I shouldn't say things like that, or I shouldn't open my mouth about the most mundane things. And that is one of the strengths of anthropology. As I was telling my family that when NIMH decided to withdraw funds from anthropology, almost completely at one point, and we were highly dependent on them. And a bunch of us went to Washington to talk to the executives at NIMH. And we would ask them a question, and they would say, blah, 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 blah. We'd ask them another question, we get blah, 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 blah. And finally, Roy Andrade looked at the head honcho, and he said, let me ask you an anthropological question. What's going on around here? So keep asking that. What's going on around here? Thank you very much.
thoughts and for carrying the action forward.
We also have the 2010 Controlling Processes readers. We have a few examples. Two copies if you want to look through it. Find me, I'll be standing in the middle. Also, there is a book signed for Dr. Nader. Thank you.
Hey, I was just telling Seth I assigned your book last semester in my Anthropology Latin American class at McGill, and people just loved it. McGill's kind of a bizarre. I was gonna. I still had it in my head, and maybe I'll still write to you. But anyway, McGill's kind of a bizarre place because most of the people in this kind of like this privilege, they're from privileged families and things, right? So but they just really engage. I just think like so many ways, particularly women. Some of them I know are from very privileged families, and somehow I just really connected with them. And they came up, and I had mentioned that I had gone to school with you and stuff, and so a couple of them came up afterwards. It's the hotel, Adrian.
See you later. Is this your little one?
Yeah, this is Lilia.
Lilia, hi.
Lilia, say hi to Jerry.
Hi.
Good to see you.
I will wait for your email.
I'll email you.
So I just wanted to tell you that.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Definitely email me if you ever
I will.
sign it again.
Yeah, no, I definitely will. If I teach that class again, I just got a postdoc, so I'm not going to be teaching for a couple of years. But if that was a really great class.
Congratulations for that.
Yeah.
Where are you?
At McGill.
Oh,
Yeah.
fantastic.